Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Prof.
Hi, Nisa. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, see, people are still coming in, so I'll just give our friends a minute to get online. Is there a program? There's a program going on today, I think. I received a notice from some of your classmates. Are a lot of people attending that program? Do you guys know? What is that program about? I've forgotten.
I don't know, Doctor. Maybe the counseling program.
I can't remember the name of the program, but it's something with Wisma Putra or something. Okay, well, I'm not sure where everyone is, but we'll get started anyway. Let them come in when they are ready. Okay, so welcome everyone to week 3 of our class. This week we will, let me just first put up with the Pucha Blast to take a look at our agenda for the week. Okay. So here's our agenda. Okay, so this one, don't worry about. This is a reminder to myself. I have to remember to report attendance for some of the students that have asked to be excused. So go ahead, everyone, and you can click on the attendance link now so you don't forget. All right, take a minute to do that. Here's Hadi. Hi, Hadi. Thanks for turning on your screen, your camera. You're the only one right now, the only courageous one. All right, so first thing we're going to just have a quick report out about the homework exercise that I gave you last week. I was going through your assignments this morning, just looking at some of them. I didn't go through all of them, but I looked for some of them. So they looked, looks like you did a good job. So thank you for that. And then we will continue with our lecture from last week that we started on the fundamentals of community development. Okay, so principles and objectives. So we'll finish up that one, and then we'll start on the next one, which is on the Malaysian 5-year development policies. Okay, so we're going to sort of shift gears a little bit and look at a little bit of a different topic there. All right, so we're going to just sort of give us an overview, a bird's eye view of how Malaysia has prioritized its development policies really since Merdeka, since independence. Okay, so we'll sort of look at the evolution of Malaysia's development goals, and that will give us an idea about how communities have really prioritized development in Malaysia over the past 50+ years. All right, and that just, again, just to give us a sort of context for what community development is about in Malaysia. And then, like last week, I hope to also this week give you some time in class, if you choose to use it, it's up to you, to do another exercise, another homework exercise related to the development policies. Okay, even though we're only going to cover the first half of that lecture, I'm going to have you guys break up into groups again, either 2 or 3. This time, either 2 or 3, And then I have posted this policy document called the Executive Summary, which is a midterm review of the 11th Malaysia Plan. So for those of you who don't know, we're currently in the 11th Malaysia Plan, although it's just about coming to an end, and we're going to be launching, the government is going to launch the new 12th Malaysia Plan very soon, once all this political and COVID stuff gets settled. And so this is a midterm review of the current Malaysia Plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to go through it together as a group. It's quite long, it's 48 pages, but it's a lot of charts and graphs, and it's not a lot of text really. But anyway, so in your groups, you can break it up. So you can either break it up in 2 or 3 parts. All right, and then I have some questions there that you need to answer. Okay, so each person in the group can answer 1 or 2 of those questions, and then you can submit them as a group. All right. So again, I don't want to, I hope to not take up the whole class time for the in-class work, lectures and so forth. And hopefully I'll have, leave you time, like last week, leave you time to work on this homework assignment. Okay, and then just a reminder, our first exam, your midterm exam will be in week 6, yeah, inshallah, week 6. So that'll be in 3 weeks. As we get closer, probably in week 5, I'll just go through it in terms of the content and what's going to be on it and so forth. All right, to help you prepare for that. All right, so are there any questions from last week or anything you want to ask me? Concerns, assignments, anything at all? So this is our last class before Bulan Puasa, yeah, Ramadan. So Ramadan starts next week, inshallah, on Tuesday. Okay, so of course we'll have classes as usual, but again, what I hope to do throughout the semester is not to take up the full class time on, you know, in-class work. I hope to keep the classes a little bit on the shorter side, give you more free time to work on different types of exercises on your own. Okay, so that should also help during the fasting month, give you more time to work on your own. Okay, so that's the plan. All right, so let's start with the homework. I'm gonna just put up some. So how did you find the homework? Was it hard to do?
A little bit, Prof.
A little
bit
bit.
hard.
Hadi, kenapa? Why was it a
Yeah.
little bit hard?
Maybe
Was it hard to
because
read? Was the reading hard?
what you call it, the case study, actually, the reading was not actually every part actually have its point actually because what you call it, the case study for me I think it was quite interesting and quite confusing because
Oh,
I never learned about Besuka, like about the Gaia committee. So
oh
I
yeah.
never knew about that. So
Oh, okay.
it was very interesting and
Yeah.
and
Okay. Thank you, Hadi. Yeah. It is very interesting. In fact, you know, it's based on a study that we did. We studied Basuga as a case study, and it was really interesting. We spent time there, getting to know the people and getting to know the place. It's a fascinating place. It's really interesting. It's so unique. It's just really unique, and we fell in love with it. And that's why we wrote up that case study, because we thought that, I mean, just I think the fact that looking at what Malaysian young people can do and what they were able to do there is really incredible, if you think about it, because they were able to help that island develop in ways that the adult leaders couldn't even do, right? Politicians, ketua kampong, nobody could get that done. And then here comes this youth association, and they're able to get it to do it, you know, to bring in, you know, that heavy infrastructure. I mean, if you think about how basic water and electricity is, you know, it's like this day and age, it's such basic infrastructure, you know, but it was really important for the people there, you know, and they really believed strongly in what their youth could do. So, it was very inspiring. I found it to be very inspiring, and I hope that, you know, there's other, and I know there are many inspiring stories of what young people are doing, not only in Malaysia, but everywhere. But these are the kind of stories that we need to capture and share. You know, people need to see what young people can do. So that was one of the reasons we did it, is to really capture that. So yeah, I hope the reading, anybody else, and did anybody else find the reading to be difficult? I mean, it is a little bit academic. It's written for an academic publication. So, but again, like you guys as 6th semester students at this level, at this stage in your bachelor's program, you know, I have confidence in you that you guys can get through it and understand it. And, you know, it's hard. It's a little bit hard reading, a little bit, I think, but I think it should help prepare you, you know, for going out into the world of work and everything. So anybody else have difficulty with the reading? It's okay, you can be honest. I appreciate honesty, so it's okay if it was. Anyone else want to share?
Hi, Prof.
Hi.
Hi, Prof.
Hi.
From me, during the exercise session, the story is quite interesting.
Yeah.
The first thing that I read, maybe the case study is too long and make me feel like want to give up. But when I start reading it, the story is getting more interesting.
Yeah.
So I started to read and finally I can finish it.
That's great. That's great, honey. Yeah, of course. This is, like I said, it's not reading like, it's not like a storybook kind of reading, you know, where it's like really fun. It's a bit tedious, the reading, because it's academic writing. So usually people read academic studies like that they want to understand the findings, they want to understand it from a research perspective. So it is a little bit, as I said, that reading is a little bit difficult, but I want to challenge you guys because I know you guys can do it. I know you guys can do it. That's why I challenged you with that kind of a paper. So, and like even for your assignment 1 later, you're going to be also choosing your own paper, you know, to critique and then to present about. So it's good that you start doing this, you know, and develop your critical thinking skills. I think it's important. It's amazing how we have lost as a species, human beings have in every culture have really lost that ability to read critically and to write critically and to think critically. So we have to make sure that we have those skills. They're really important skills for later on. But I appreciate your honesty, honey. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you're able to get through it. So anyone else? No one else wants to share? Okay, so anyway, here are some of the answers. Now, I'm not grading your homework assignment like I'm going to grade an exam. You know, you'll just get points for doing it, the additional points like I mentioned. And these assignments will help you, like if you're on the border later between grades, you know, it'll push you over by doing these assignments. But if your answers, you know, if they were anywhere in this kind of ballpark, I just touched on the basic themes here, not the specifics, because I saw in some of you guys, you put in a lot of detail in your answers, which is very nice. So congratulations. But here I just give the general kind of answers, just so you have an idea. So economics. So yeah, economic development did take place in Basuga, in Gaya, from the work of Basuga. Okay, so the Persatuan's programs and projects led to new business and economic activity. And also by bringing in water and electricity, of course, remember last week you learned about infrastructure development, right? As an important aspect of development. So by bringing in that infrastructure, they're providing the foundation for future economic development. All right, and then also the skills that they were passing on to the villagers as well as the youth through their programs, right? So they're providing a lot of skills that people can use to develop businesses and so forth. So maybe Basuga itself is not a business, they're not doing business per se, but they're providing a lot of the capacity building, you know, that allows or will allow them, the others on the island, to do business. Okay, so they're really contributing to economic development in, you could say, more of an indirect way. Okay, but they're definitely contributing. Socialization, yes, as we could see in the study, a lot of socialization occurred between different groups of youth, right, as well as between the youth and the adults. Okay, and here I give some examples from the study, from the case study. Okay, so the youth members in Basuga had a lot of socialization opportunities with school leaders, community leaders, business leaders, stakeholders, etc. Okay, so the work of Basuga really helped to develop the socialization on the island. And not just on the island, but even off the island as well. Community, in terms of politics, well, community leaders, they supported Basuga a lot. Okay, and that was one of the things that Basuga really wanted to target, was to really try and get the support of the adult political leaders. So let me ask you a question. Would you consider Basuga's approach to be politics? Was Basuga involved in politics, or were they just involved in community building, community development? Because the word politics in Malaysia, people use that word all the time. And sometimes it gets confused with other things. Like, for example, the functioning of government, how government works, right? How government does things. So a lot of people here in Malaysia, they refer to that as politics. But is that really politics? So would you say that Basuga was involved in politics? Anybody want to answer the question? What do you think? Anybody? Anybody? You guys asleep? You awake? Last semester, I had this class at 8 o'clock and the students were very sleepy. But you guys have no excuse. It's 11 o'clock. So what do you think? Was there, Farhana?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Okay. Anybody want to guess? Throw out your ideas.
I don't think they involved in politics. They just
Okay.
get help from the government and contribute to the community development.
Okay. So Isa, you don't think they were involved in politics?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Can I try?
Of course. Don't need to ask. Just jump in, Nabila.
Okay. I think at first, their main purpose is really like to help the community for the electricity, to get the electricity, and then the water supply.
Yeah.
But then I read there is government involvement.
Yeah.
And I think they give money, and I think government does influence a little bit of that organization.
Okay. So this is the question that I'm asking. Thank you. That's very good, Nabila. And I'm glad you mentioned that government involvement, because this is what often people get confused with. Is any kind of government involvement politics? Just because the government is involved, does that mean it's politics? That's really the question I'm asking.
I mean, in Malaysia, I think it is.
Why in Malaysia?
Because especially like in Sabah and Sarawak, I don't know.
Okay.
I think their leaders are not like as honest as as a leader should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nabila, are you from Sabah or Sarawak?
I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I read in the papers.
Yeah. Okay.
News. And recently there's a video of, I don't know if it's either Sabah or Sarawak, but their leader like giving out money at
I saw
market,
that.
just like
I
that.
saw that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just walking down the line, just giving out 50 ringgit.
I think it
right?
does influence a little bit.
Yeah, so that is definitely politics. What he was doing is clearly politics, because he's using money to obviously to garner support from people, right? So that's clearly politics. But when the government is involved, like for example, if the government is like the government providing infrastructure, electricity and water, is that necessarily politics? What's the difference? My question, I'm trying to get at, what is the difference between government, general government business and function, and politics? what is it about politics? What that guy was doing, what that everything was the Timbalang entry, right? He was in that video, he was giving out 50 ringgit to the, so that's not,
I'm not
that's
sure.
not,
I don't know who it is.
yeah, that's not government business. What he's doing there is he's trying to get support for people to support him or whatever. There's a difference. There's a difference between engaging in politics and engaging in government business, okay? Because the general function of government is to serve the people. Politics is about garnering favor and getting power, okay? So they're actually two different things. Now, of course, they very much overlap, because to get into government, of course, there's a lot of politicking, right? Obviously. But a government doing what it's supposed to do in terms of providing services to the people is not politics. Okay, it's really not. Politics is about power, right? It's about how people go about getting power. Right? And so Basuga, they were not really interested in power. What they're interested in is getting support for the work they were doing and the support for the people on the island. So you could say, though, when they lobbied the government for the electricity and water, you could say that was political, because they were actually involved in lobbying and involved in trying to persuade the political leaders to give them, the infrastructure that they felt they deserved. So you could say that they were involved in a little bit of political activity there, but whether they didn't see themselves as obviously as politicians. So I think in any situation where you are, again, trying to get support and political support for what you're trying to do, there is an element of politics involved. Okay, so there was probably a little bit there, but they didn't see themselves as really doing politics or being politicians. They're just trying to get help and support for their community. So it's a very fine line, it's a very fine line, but we should definitely be able to differentiate between what is politics and what is just government service, right? Governments, people providing a service and in the role of government. All right, so, but that's a good answer. Thank you for that. All right, and then finally, the last one here. So participation from community. So they recruited a lot of youth, obviously, from the community. And then as their programs became more popular and the adults noticed that they were doing a lot of really good work, then the adults began to participate as well. And they started to volunteer in the Basuga programs and provide support in different ways and so forth. And even the community leaders, the Ketua Kampong, were very excited about what they were doing, so they supported them as well. And Basuga, the youth leaders, were invited to actually join the JKK for the communities, right? So they were involved in the community, AJK. And then getting adults to support youth initiatives is not always easy. Okay, so from early on, Basuga had tremendous support from not only the island youth, but also the adult residents. They also received support from leaders in Kota Kinabalu who wanted to see the association succeed in developing the community. All right. So most of you, I think, answered these pretty well. And again, this is just a general response. I saw in your answers, you provide a lot more detail, which is good. Okay, so just wanted to go over that. And we're gonna, hopefully throughout the semester, we'll be doing more case studies. This is just the first one. We'll have different case studies. Some I'll show you through videos and stuff like that. All right. Any questions about that? Comments? So when it comes to community resource development, it's really important to see examples, like case studies like this. Examples really help to bring it to life. Community resource development is not a very theoretical topic. It's not a very theoretical subject. It's a very much applied subject. So you really have to understand it in the context of real communities. Okay, so let me move now to our continuation from our lecture last week on the principles of community development. So we stopped after here, I think, part 2. Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about now the goals of community development and the sort of general steps and processes. Okay, so in terms of achieving development objectives, whenever we do programs in communities, they always have objectives. Okay, so every good program has objectives. I'm sure you've learned about this in your program development classes in our bachelor's program. All right. And then each of those specific objectives should sort of aim for the larger state and then national objectives for development, okay? Which is why we have things like a national 5-year development policy, right? So for example, the Malaysia plan, the 5-year Malaysian plan is a national development policy. Of course, it's a very general policy because it's about the whole country, right? It looks at development for the whole country. If I'm a community leader, though, I need to figure out, okay, if this is the national plan for development, what role does my community play in trying to address or achieve those national objectives? Okay, so at the community level, the community has to translate those big national objectives into smaller local objectives, all right? And that's when a policy becomes really relevant. It becomes what we call in English operationalized. It becomes, put in motion. It comes to life. A lot of policies, however, unfortunately, they don't. Right. So, Malaysia launches a new national government policy, and then nobody really pays attention to it, and nothing happens. Okay. So that's why it's important that communities understand these bigger policies and figure out how their work fits in. How does our community work fit into this big national policy? All right. So that's why it says community development objectives should be in accordance with the goals at the ministry and national levels. Okay. So objectives at the local level, for example, increase average household income from 600 to 900 ringgit. This is back in 2003. Okay. So that may have been a very real, an actual local goal. Maybe this is a low income community. Maybe this is a rural community. Okay. Some rural area, and they want to increase the average household income of the people living in that area from 600 to 900 ringgit. All right. Well, that's in line with, as you see on the right side, the goals at the national level, which is to eradicate poverty. Okay. So you see there is this, where's my little pen? Okay. You have the big goal here, which is general. To eradicate poverty is a very general goal. Okay, it doesn't say how much, it doesn't say, how many ringgit you want to, increase. It just says we want to get rid of poverty. Okay, that's a national level goal, right? It's appropriate for a major policy. But if I'm at the community level, I'm the Ketua Kampong, I'm the, even the Dun, the local representative in the state Dun or whatever, I have to think about, gee, how are we going to do this? In my constituency, in my town, in my kampong, how am I going to increase income, right, to begin to move towards eradicating poverty? So the local leader has to figure out how to do this one. Okay. So you see, it's really the community that has to implement the big policy, and they have to figure out how to do it and how much to do it. Right? So they have to understand. First, they have to know, okay, well, what is the average income of our people, all right, of the people in our area? And so how much more do we need? How much more economic activity do we need to increase their income level? All right? So it's a lot of work. It's difficult. The challenge is for the people at the local level. All right, so that's one. Second one, so we have the first one, to achieve the development objectives. Okay, so the goals of community is to achieve the bigger development objectives. And the second is to develop functional social institutions. All right. Now, community, if you look at the word community in English, it is a combination of unity and and this is actually comes from commune, or sort of a collective. Okay, a collective. So it's a collective of people working in unity. Okay, it's a very nice word actually in English, community. A collective group of people working in unity, right? And so the word community, it's exactly what it means, right? Based on the principle of kerjasama. Okay, kerjasama, working in a group, right? Gotong royong, it's a perfect example of, of that principle. And one thing I've always been amazed at gotong royong in Malaysia is that, you know, gotong royong in Malaysia, they're not really planned out, right? They say, okay, we're gonna have a gotong royong, and then you have the leaders of the gotong royong, and then everyone just shows up. But somehow the work gets done. It's amazing, right? Even though it's not the most organized, usually some are, but it's not the most organized type of program, but it gets done, the work gets done. Why? Because the spirit there is community. The spirit there is working in a group. We all do whatever we have to do to get the work done. Okay, so it really has that spirit of community, which is very nice. Yeah, very nice. Okay, so working in a group. So indirectly, community development encourages the development of working committees. Okay, associations, institutions, all have their functions. Yeah, so again, it's to develop the functional social institutions. This is community development, is to get people working in a group through these social institutions. All right. So you have your JKKK, you have youth associations, you have women's clubs, you have NGOs. Okay. You have your residents associations. All right. So all these types of social institutions are what drive community development. Okay, so communities can't really, they don't work very well if they don't have these functional social institutions. Right? And like in the US, the culture in the US is a bit different in the sense that in the US, we have a lot of these local institutions. And that's one of the characteristics of a good, strong democracy. Like you have a democratic society, you have a lot of these types of voluntary social institutions that do a lot of the work for the community. Like where I live here, I live in Bukit Makuta, which is in sort of on the border between Selangor and Negeri Sembilan, near Nilai. And in my area, my taman, we have a very, very active residents association. They are very active, very committed. Right, and we can see because of their commitment and their activity and the way they work to bring the community together and stuff like that. Of course, the community thrives in a lot of ways, does very well. Right, so these types of institutions are really critical for community development. Okay, so social institutions is another one. The third one is to strengthen community solidarity. Again, emphasizing the word unity, right? We want to have a strong solidarity. Okay, so solidarity means what? Who can tell me what solidarity means? Have you heard of this word, solidarity? If you look at the word itself, it kind of gives us an idea. Solid, what does solid mean?
Strong.
Strong, exactly. Yeah, strong. So it's this idea of strength through unity, right? We are in solidarity with each other, or we are in solidarity with this particular movement. In other words, we are in full support of it. And by doing that, we are strong. We are strong in our movement, okay? So communities, when they have this solidarity, of course, they're more effective. They work better. Okay, so you have this idea. And so strengthening interpersonal communication, right? So now a lot of communities have their own apps. You know, iNeighbor, we're using, my community uses iNeighbor to increase and to improve on interpersonal communication between the members, right? Now we have online communities, so interpersonal communication now, there's no problem, right? It's easy to communicate. Okay, but the people that are doing the communicating have to be good at it. They have to be good communicators. So that's really important. Okay, so in strengthening interpersonal communication, and through different community development programs, people get to know each other. All right, so we get to know our neighbors, we get to know our co-members in our community, whatever kind of community it is, through these programs. And that increases the solidarity, right? That increases the unity and the solidarity of the community. Okay, and the idea is here's another word, cohesiveness. Okay, so another word that reflects the same idea. You want to have this community cohesiveness. Okay, So communities don't work very well when they are not in solidarity, when they're not cohesive, right? So that's one of the goals of community development, is to bring the community together. All right, and then 4, all right, developing local leaders, okay? Development of local leadership. Okay, so all group initiatives in communities need leaders, all right? And of course, we have 2 types of leaders. We have formal leaders and non-formal leaders. Now, maybe some of you are very good formal leaders. Maybe some of you are very good non-formal leaders. Okay, so you have difference between election, right? Formal leaders are elected, non-formal leaders are not elected, but they lead in the background, right? They lead through example. Okay, so formal leaders, of course, they have affiliations with organizations and agencies, like the district officer, health officer, etc. Non-formal leaders they usually have a lot of influence due to their reputation, expertise, popularity, etc. Okay, and so like nowadays we have all these influencers, right, on social media and so forth. These are actually non-formal leaders. They're actually leading large groups of people in the society, either because of maybe they're popular, maybe they're very good at doing something, maybe they're good at, maybe they're entertainers, or maybe they are artists, or maybe they are motivational speakers, whatever. But they have this reputation, popularity, and they're actually leaders, whether they realize it or not. Okay, so the traditional ones here, as you can see, the village head, pensioners, doctors, teachers, JKK, professors, these types of people. And nowadays we can add to this list, right? We can even add to this list nowadays, because there are other kinds of non-formal leaders. And in fact, we have a PhD student at UPM who is actually studying artists as political leaders. So you have these artists that get involved in politics, right? So every country has, we used to have in the US, we had Donald Trump, who was our former president. He used to be, of course, a TV star. So with The Apprentice, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, the famous actor, was also the governor of California, right? So that's the US. Philippines, we know the Philippines, they have many political leaders who are former actors and athletes and stuff, right? And Malaysia also has. So this student is actually studying all these artists and their involvement in politics, okay, as political leaders. Okay, so it's a very interesting study. Okay, either way, they have authority, either formalized authority or informal authority, right? Either they have formal authority through their leadership roles, or they demand or they command authority through their popularity. All right. So either way, there is this leadership development. So leadership development is an important part of community development. Okay, developing local leaders. And then 5th, to mobilize human resources. Okay, so it's important that we can mobilize the human resources in the community. And to do that, we have to actually know what are our human resources. So if we are a leader of this particular community, online community, whatever kind of community, we have to know what kind of resources we have. Who's in our group? What kind of educational background do they have? What are their areas of expertise, right? What are their interests? We have some very talented people in our communities, and sometimes we're not aware of it. We don't really know what we have in terms of human resources, right? Human capital. Okay, and of course, the most important resource of any community is the people. All right. So you guys are all HRD people. I don't need to tell you this. I don't need to lecture you on this because you already know this, but people are the most important community resource. All right. And that's what makes community development an HRD process, because community development is about developing the community, the people in the community, as well as the other resources. But first and foremost, it always starts with the people. So the more active the program, okay, in community development, the better mobilization of the human resources in the community. Okay, so if you have a very effective program like Basuga, for example. I mean, Basuga, within a matter of, I don't know how, very short time, they were able to recruit hundreds of youth into their Persatuan. Now, of course, it's easy in the sense that it's the only Persatuan on the island, so they don't have to compete with anybody. But at the same time, by mobilizing that many young people, it gave them a lot of human resource power, right? They had a lot of say, a lot of influence on the young people on the island. Okay, so they're really able to mobilize the human resources through their programs. So in the case of a youth association, what are some of the easy ways to mobilize youth? If you want them, for example, to join a program. We think of youth, like youth-based communities or youth-based persatuans. What are some of the easier ways to mobilize young people in these types of communities? What do you think?
Maybe
How did Basuga do it?
maybe yeah, maybe like Basuka did before this, maybe prepare some activities or maybe prepare a program that very relates that are very related to the youngsters basically.
Okay, such as in their case, what do they use?
Sports.
Sports.
Sport.
Yeah, sports. It's one of the best ways because a lot of, especially males, boys like sports. And in that island specifically, they like bola. They like to play bola and they like to play volleyball. And in fact, their volleyball team is one of the best in the country. They have these Persatuan tournaments, and they always either win or come in, top three, whatever. So they're known for their volleyball and bola. So they knew that about their youth, about the community members, right? So they use those kind of programs to mobilize them. So that's why every community has to know the makeup of the community so that they can know how to mobilize the members, right? So maybe you have a community of mostly elderly people, orang tua. So what kind of programs do you want to offer them to get them to mobilize them and to get them involved in the community? Of course, it has to be something that's relevant to them. So maybe so you have to know their racial background, ethnic background, age, right? The income level, education level, right? Interests, their work history, maybe even what kind of work did they do when they were before they were pensioners. So all those things are very important to know how to mobilize the people in the community. Okay, so Masuga was very smart in doing that. But then once they got the youth involved, then they want to get the adults involved, right? And so they moved to other types of programs that they knew the adults would like language programs. Many of the adults wanted to learn how to read Arabic or even Quran, recite Mangaji, like that. And then also other languages. They want to learn other languages. So they really learned and studied their own community to find out what's the best way to mobilize them. Okay, so very important for mobilizing human resources in community development. Okay, increasing the capability of community to face challenges. Okay, so challenges, COVID-19, right? Big challenge now. Okay, so how do we prepare the community to face this challenge? All right, and so this is one of the roles of community development, is to prepare the community to face challenges. Okay, so there's the educational process, non-formal learning types of programs, and then having social institutions that facilitate this. So again, having like Basuga actually aimed, I think we wrote about it in the case study, but they wanted to create an actual training center on the island, a formal training center, where there would just be training going on all the time for the community members, right? Sort of like, and they even described it as like a community college for the Basuga residents. So it's just constant courses, training programs going on all the time to really uplift the community members' education level. through non-formal means. Okay, it's a really fantastic vision that they had, and they called it, what did they call it? I can't forget now. I can't remember now. Oh, they even have they even had the building ready for it. Okay, so they're really, they have a vision, and they can really see that they need to prepare the community to face different types of challenges, and they want to do it through education. Okay, so it's a very much an HRD approach that they're using. Okay, so for example, in communities like Felda communities and rural communities, you have fluctuations in commodity prices, right? Like palm oil. The price is always fluctuating, and it affects the community directly. It affects the community. ICT and education is another big challenge, especially for poorer communities that don't have ICT facilities. They don't have, many of our students, maybe even some of you guys during COVID-19 are facing this challenge with ICT and education. I mean, COVID-19 is really bringing to light this problem of ICT and education. Okay? When you have to rely on ICT to educate, right, it creates, it makes the gap between rich and poor even worse, right? Because people that cannot afford the technology, they just lose out on education, right? And so even in public education that's supposed to be free for everybody, when it comes to a situation where they have to buy their own ICT equipment, computers, handphones, whatever, suddenly then you have these big gaps between those who are wealthy and those who cannot afford it, the rich and the poor. So it's a big problem. It's a challenge. Mass media is a challenge, okay? Influence of mass media. And then changes in demographic profiles, okay? So as communities change in terms of their demographics, age, whether parents are working or not, stuff like that. So these are all challenges facing communities. So how does the community prepare itself to address these different challenges? Okay, and then finally, to encourage participation at the local level, all right? So we really want the community residents to be participating, to be involved, okay? In the planning, in the implementation, so that they gain the benefits of development, all right? Because if not, they're not going to gain the benefits of development. They won't reap the benefits of it. Okay, so they have to be involved, all right? So involvement and participation is a critical part of community development. Again, if it's not, the whole unity part of community is missing, right? And it's not really involving the people, then it's not really community development, right? It's like this top-down kind of arrangement. Okay, any questions about these 7 principles? All right, so just to recap, to achieve the development objectives, the main development objectives, the first goal of community development, okay, to develop functional social institutions, all right, to strengthen community solidarity, all right, develop local leaders, mobilize the human resources, increase the capacity of the community to face challenges, and then encourage participation. All right. So those are the 7 goals of CD. Okay, so some of the principles of community development now, they're based on local problems. All right. So for example, dengue fever, we all have this. I think all communities in Malaysia have faced this at one point or another, right? How do we, the principle there that it's based on local problems. So we don't look so much at what's happening in other places in the country. We focus on what's really affecting our residents in our community or our members of our community, right? So what are the local problems that the community is facing? So it could be if it's like a neighborhood or a community, a physical community, it could be like dengue fever, poverty, etc. Okay, so it's always based on the local problems that communities are facing. And so we have to know what those problems are. So a strong community is very much in touch with the problems that its residents are facing. So community leaders have to know what are the problems. And this is what we see on not just Facebook, but social media all the time. They always have these people showing, the local politicians going out to the people and like in this case, giving money or getting involved in local programs and stuff like that. All right. And then people will often complain that their political leaders don't know what's going on in the local areas, right? So they're not really fulfilling the principle of community development, which is to know the local problems. So every individual is a human resource, therefore CD is needed, as I mentioned, HRD process, okay? So the principle here is that community development is an HRD process. Okay, this is really the principle. And that's a really important principle. So even though a lot of the national policies focus on economic development, okay, at the end of the day, it's really about developing people. Community development is really about developing people and having people involved in that process. Okay, so the principle is that the goal of CD is to help the people improve their livelihood, to help the people improve their own livelihood, to support that. All right, to support that. Okay, another principle, leadership is important. It gives direction, okay? Gives the community direction. Leaders have to give the community the right direction and the right kinds of support, okay? The leaders have to translate those big national policies into local policies and programs, okay? And by doing that, they give people direction. So we want to reduce poverty. We want to increase employment for our youth, okay? We want to have more educational programs. We want to have more awareness programs. Okay, these are all decisions by the leaders because they are aware of the community problems, they're aware of the national policies, and they sort of fit these two together. So expenses, or here the expenses means the money spent, right? Or the sort of investments, okay? You can think of them as an investment, all right? And it has to do with the participatory approach. All right, so we may be investing in a new educational program, okay, an awareness program to fight dengue fever, for example, okay? But we want the community involved, all right? We want a participatory approach. How can we get the members of the community to be involved in this? How can we get the community members to be involved in the planning of the program, okay, to help carry out the program? Maybe we have people who are retired experts, trainers, lecturers, teachers, and they can actually give the courses, right? So they're involved. They are from the community and they're participating as the ones delivering the sessions and so forth. Okay, so we want to take a participatory approach of development. Okay, this is what would be the, can someone tell me the opposite? What is the opposite of this participatory approach? We often see the opposite. Who can tell me the opposite of a participatory approach is what? Anyone? If you're not using a participatory approach, it's usually being done how? What's the word we use in English for that? Maybe I should start calling out people just to make sure you guys are all there. So who can tell me what's the opposite of a participatory approach? And no one has any idea?
Involuntary approach.
Yeah, so what, okay, so involuntary approach, okay, and that often means what? How is it usually conducted, an involuntary approach? We talked a little bit about this last week. Isa, you're on the right track.
Not sure.
If the residents of the community are not doing it themselves, who's doing it for them? Hadi, I think we were talking about this last week, Hadi, right?
Yeah, I think so, but
I don't
we
remember.
cannot. But
The word is top down, top down. Okay,
yeah,
top
top
down,
down, yeah.
top down. Okay, so government comes in and does it for the people, right? Or the leaders, they just do it themselves. Right? There's no participation at all from the community members. It's just done for us. Now, of course, a lot of people like that. They don't mind that. You know, oh, just do it. You know, they come in, they just do it for you. Right. But then a lot of times in communities, it doesn't work very well because there's a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of suspicion, right? As opposed to when community members themselves and the communities themselves are involved in these types of programs and whatnot. So communities often prefer a participatory approach, and they're usually more effective that way, and they're usually more sustainable that way as well. Okay, because often we get what are called these, not just top down, but also one-off programs. Okay, one-off programs are the worst. In terms of effectiveness, they've done studies. So for those of you who are involved in training, your HRD people, so if you ever study training programs, what are the most effective types of training programs? Okay, the least effective, okay, and this is pretty much proven by research, are one-off programs. Okay, if you want lasting effects, lasting change, do not do one-off programs. Okay, they don't work. If you do a series of one-off programs, it's different. A series of one-off programs, you have it regularly, or you have a series, you know, of one-off. That's different. They're more effective. Okay, more effective. What's the most effective type of training program? Design. Who can tell me? You guys should all know this, being HRD people. In fact, I should be able to call on anybody in the class right now, and you should be able to get this question right. The most effective format, or type of training program. Okay, I think I'm going to call on somebody. Let's see, who should I call on? Oh, somebody's just spoke. Oh, Fikia. Okay, what is it, Fikia? What's the most effective? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
On the job training.
Yes, thank you. All right, you salvaged your friends here in the class. Okay. Go HRD. All right. Yeah, on the job training is the most effective. Why is it the most effective? Now we get to the harder question. Oh, generally speaking, why? Huh?
We experience.
Experience is definitely one part of it. Yeah, sure. Right. It's experiential in the way that it's learned. Whatever the content is it's learned. It's experiential. Okay. What else? On the job training. It's not just experiential though, because I could just have somebody go out and do something. That's experiential. Why else?
Hi, Prof.
Hi.
I think the reason of effective is about actually I think the job training will be make the employee know more about industrial rules and industrial procedures. I think.
Okay, so they can't do that just by studying it. They have to be on the job to get that. Liang? Is it Liang?
Li Siyang. You can call me Chris.
Oh, Chris, sorry. Okay, Chris.
Sorry. I'm not sure the second question.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can learn industrial rules just by studying them, right? You don't need necessarily have to have on-the-job training to learn industrial rules, do you?
I think if from study, maybe it's more job experience, and how to do this job will be more uh, following the company rules.
Okay.
I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys both are touching on experiential. That's one part of it. It's guided experiential though. It's guided experiential. So it's not only experiential, but it's there. You're also being guided as you're doing it. So for example, if you do something wrong, immediately there's someone there to mentor you, to explain to you, okay, this is what you did wrong. This is why you did it. Next time, try it like this, right? So it's guided experiential learning, number one. Number two is that it's over time. It's over time. And that time component is very important because the more time is involved, in other words, if it's done over time, over an extended period of time, it becomes more habitual, right? Habitual. So you learn it the right way, you learn it by being guided, and then it's also over time. So it becomes something that's like second nature to you, habitual, right? So it becomes part of your everyday practice, right? And so those are a couple of the reasons why on-the-job training is the most effective. It happens over time, it's guided, and it's experiential, right? Whereas a one-off is just like one-off, here it is, and then like a week later you forget it, right? Because there's no time component to it. Right? But on-the-job training is it's the most expensive in terms of commitment and investment. It's the most expensive. It's hard for organizations, harder for organizations to do it, obviously. Okay, thank you for your responses. All right. Community development should start from the grassroots level, all right, and then expand to district and state levels. So this is a very kind of democratic kind of thinking, right? But often it doesn't, right? It starts top down, especially in Malaysia. Malaysia is a very top down society. Things often stem from the national federal government, and they work their way down. In other countries that are more, their democratic process is a bit more liberal. We would call it liberal democratic. They tend to start more at the grassroots level, and they sort of work their way up. So like, for example, young people, Basuga starts a youth association, and now Basuga starts to spread to other states, right? Like that. Okay, it starts local and then it spreads. Okay. So those are different models of community development. Malaysia has a more top-down model, other countries have a more grassroots level model. They start at the grassroots level. But there's very few countries in the world that actually have youth associations. Did you guys know that? Youth associations in Malaysia are very unique because they are entirely run by youth. A lot of countries don't have those. They don't have it as systematic and as systematically as Malaysia has, which is really interesting. Very interesting. Oh yeah, anyway, it's interesting to me. I don't know, maybe it's not interesting to you guys, but community development is based on felt needs. Okay, so for those of you who took my class last time, another question for you. What are felt needs as opposed to unfelt needs? You remember this from our class last time? Those who had me last time in class, in the youth development class? Community development really tries to turn unfelt needs into felt needs. Okay, so what's the difference? Hang on, Isa, we're taking a break in a few minutes. I know you're looking sleepy. Hang in there, hang in there. I know online learning is hard. Online learning is hard. I get very sleepy too. If I'm not talking, I get very sleepy also. So don't feel bad, it's okay. But I really appreciate the fact that you at least have your camera on. So I can see how sleepy you are. Okay, felt needs versus unfelt needs. Who remembers? Anyone? Is poverty a felt need or unfelt need? Poverty. If you're poor, if you're miskin, Is that a felt
Yeah.
need? Sorry, Saliha? Can you say that again? I didn't hear you. What did she say?
Yes, bro. I think poverty is a felt need because we sense the what you call it, that kind of atmosphere or environment regarding to the words, maybe to the people who regards to the poverty. I think
Yeah.
so lah.
Yeah, good, Hadi. Yeah, absolutely. It's something that you are completely and fully conscious of, aware, you're totally aware of this need that you have, right? So if you don't have enough money, obviously it's a felt need, right? It's something you're completely aware of. But we have, as people, we often have needs that we're not even aware of, right? Other people may notice these needs, but we're not aware of them. So for example, you may be poor, Hadi, and that's your felt need. But as maybe as your mother, your parent, maybe as a friend, maybe as a teacher or something, they may see that you lack time management skills. And so one of the reasons why you're poor is because you don't know how to manage your time. Okay. So that's an unfelt need. You're not aware of it, but you need it, right? So community leaders, their job is to identify what are the unfelt needs in the community and then to turn them into felt needs so that people are aware and they can address them. Okay. So this is a really important role for community leaders. We have to look at our community and say, our community is suffering, for example, like crime. Some communities, they have a lot of crime in the community, right? A lot of jinaya and snatch thief, whatever it is, different types of crime, house break-in, much to do. That's the felt need, obviously. If people don't feel safe, that's a felt need. Okay, but there must be some reason behind it. What is the need that's causing all this crime? And maybe it's just because there's other people in the community that they can't get work, so they're robbing, they're stealing because they can't get jobs. So the unfelt need is actually the fact there's a lack of employment in the community. All right. So felt and unfelt needs is very important for community leaders to really understand, because otherwise they can't really help the community to get beyond those problems. All right. So, okay. That's the end of our first half of the lecture. So let's take a break because I think you guys are probably sleepy. All right. We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 12:20, okay?
I approve.
All right. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize the chat. I did not have my chat box open. I see there are some comments in the chat box. Farhana has, okay, that's an older one. Oh, Pravina, thank you, Pravina. And okay, so Farhana asked, the unfelt needs are felt by poor people or the community? Unfelt needs can be felt, that's the whole point about unfelt needs, is that they're not felt. People don't realize this need that they're having, or they don't know the real cause behind the felt need, right? Like the example of Hadi and poverty and time management, all right? And so they are needs of the community that are not realized by the community, or people in the community don't realize what their true needs are, right? And so that's the role of the leader, as I was saying, that's the role of the community leaders, is to be able to really have a sense of what are the unfelt needs, not only the felt needs. All right, Farhana, is that clear? Does that make sense? Faham? Okay.
Yes, Prof.
Oh,
Alright,
there's
thank
your
you.
voice. I was looking at the chat box and then you spoke. So okay. All right. So let's take a 10-minute break and we'll see everybody back. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Everyone back? Can we start again?
Yes, Prof.
Okay. So I hope you guys don't mind. I like to take breaks during online learning because I find it very tiring. Both as the student and the lecturer, they're both are tiring. So I like to take frequent breaks. I think it helps to break up the monotony. Okay. So for those of you who don't, there's some people that just like to stay on straight for like 3 hours, and I don't know how you guys do that, but it's not my style. All righty. So let's move on. Now I want to just do the second. I'm going to move to the second part of the lecture. Again, you know, I'm actually not a big fan of lectures, especially for online learning. But of course, there's no way around the fact that there is a certain amount of knowledge transfer that has to go on, right? So of course, I like to use case studies. I'm gonna later in the semester we'll be looking at videos and movies, and I use different approaches. But in some cases, we still need to refer to traditional lecturing. So it is really important to some degree, especially when you're talking about a new topic that you're not familiar with. There has to be this sort of traditional knowledge transfer. Okay, so for those who have a hard time staying attentive during lectures, just do your best. Try your best. That's why I encourage you guys to ask questions and to give feedback and so forth, because it helps you to stay engaged. It really does. So feel free to engage with me on any of these topics. All right, so now we're going to look at a different topic. We're going to sort of take a little historical walk through the Malaysian 5-year development policies. And from this, I just want us to really focus on looking at how the priorities of Malaysia as a country and its development have evolved over the past 50 years. Okay, so I don't know how much of this you guys know. I'm not going to go really that in depth on these, just to get a sort of bird's eye understanding view of how the country's development goals have evolved. It's interesting because Malaysia is a very young country, actually, just 58, 59. How old is Malaysia now? Or are we 60 yet? 7, 43, 20. Oh my God, 64. Sorry. Yeah, 64, right? This will be 64 years. So even so, 64 years is still, compared to a lot of countries in the world, is very young. All right. So there has been a tremendous amount of development that has taken place in the country over the past 60 years. And so just important to look at it, because as we showed from the past, the last lecture, right? The goals, the development goals for the country are very important for communities, right? If they should be very much linked, intertwined, right? So we can sort of see how that's been shaped over the years. Okay, so we have development in pre and post-independent Malaysia. So they have the period leading up to independence, and then the post-independence period. Okay, and so starting with going way back to the 1950s, even before Merdeka, right? There was actually a development plan, all right, which is very interesting. Okay, even though the British were still involved around, they were still running the country, but even at that point there was a development plan, all right, and it was focused on infrastructure development, okay, and economic growth through primary commodities. Can anybody tell me what are primary commodities? Does anybody know what are what is the meaning of primary commodities?
Something that is really like needed for like daily tasks like road.
Okay, so roads are definitely under infrastructure. What, Nabila, do you know what a commodity is? Forget primary for a minute. What are commodities? A lot of these are
Is it-
economic terms. Sorry, go ahead.
Is it kemudahan? It's not.
No, actually commodities is
Oh,
something.
it's not.
Yeah, it's actually, oh, there's the chat box. Okay, hold on. I don't want to miss the chat anymore. Yeah, Farhana, very good. It's raw, well, it's raw materials. Yeah, it usually refers to raw materials. So a commodity is technically anything that can be traded, right? A commodity, but it usually refers to raw materials. So, and so here, primary commodities, exactly like coal, Farhana mentioned in the chat box, coal, gold, tin, rubber, palm oil, okay? These are some of the major commodities in Malaysia, right? And this is really why Malaysia was colonized by the British, okay? Why was Malaysia colonized? They weren't, Malaysia was not, or Malaya was not colonized because of its strategic location or something like that. Although Malacca is actually in a very strategic location. It was, you guys, your country was colonized for your commodities, for your raw materials, your natural resources, all right? The same reason why Indonesia was colonized, tremendous amounts of raw materials. India, same thing. So they came and they colonized and they extracted all these raw materials and sent them back to, for example, Britain and the Netherlands to produce higher end products. So all the rubber went to making all the, the rubber-based products that the West was using for their own economic development, right? So it was really the development of these primary commodities is what brought the colonists, the colonialists here. Okay, and so once it was sort of seen that the British were going to be leaving, then the focus was on developing these primary commodities for the sake of Malaysians, for your ancestors, for the people here to develop the economy, right? To develop the local economy. Again, this is before globalization. I think this is really just developing Malaysia. All right, so of course they start with the foundation, which is to develop the primary commodities. Okay, and so it all started with that. And then of course infrastructure, right? So developing the roads, the train lines, electricity, the grid, right? Electricity grid, all that. Okay, so this is the foundation of all economics, really, is these two things. Okay, so to start with, you start with the basics. Okay, and then the period between 56 to 60, which is really the Merdeka period, and it was actually called the first Malaya Plan. Okay, so the thrust of the policy during this period was, again, still on infrastructure development. Okay, but now focusing on independence. So now independence was happening, right? And so when the country's moving to independence, of course, the first batch of leaders in the country really want to make sure that there is, there is a developed economy so that the society can sustain itself, and you can stay independent. So Merdeka is very important. Is one thing, getting independence is one thing, but maintaining independence and maintaining a healthy, stable society is what they were thinking of. And so to do that, you have to have economic growth. You have to have strong infrastructure. Otherwise, the whole country can really fall apart, right? Once the British have left. So this was their thrust, their priority. So we have the Rural and Industrial Development Authority, okay? All right, so developing communities, especially the rural areas. And there was a lot of concern over the rural areas, right? Land development schemes. It's another one, okay? A government strategy for development among rural people. So there's a lot of concern over the rural people. And a lot of the rural people were Malays, right? At that time. So can you name a land development scheme? Very famous land development scheme that still exists today. That was started in this period. Siapa tahu? Land development scheme, very famous one. was started in this period of the 1956 between 1960.
Is it Felda?
Yes, exactly, Felda. So the big one is Felda. So Felda, Felkra came a little bit later. Felkra was in the later in the 60s, but Felda was the really original one. Okay, so really to give rural people land that they could, you know, develop, and they could maintain some economic stability. Okay, so this is some of the strategies that were used. Okay, so we have Felda here, and then Felkra came a little bit later. It was like 1966, I believe, Felkra. All right, but you can see here. All right, so these schemes were very important for developing the rural areas. It's hard, even though Malaysia is a small country, it's really hard to imagine that at that time, when the population was only like maybe 10 million people, there was actually a lot of land that was idle, was not being used, right? And so they were trying to make sure that they made use of this land to help the people, and then by doing that, helping the country to develop. Okay, and then so the 1961 to 1965 period was the second Malaya Plan. Okay, so it's really the second 5-year plan. Continuation of the land development programs. Okay, and then of course developing the political administration. So again, this is a brand new country. I mean, Malaysia just got its independence, and so we have to remember that. Imagine starting a country from the very beginning. You have to make sure that there is a stable political government situation, right? Again, otherwise things can fall apart very easily, very quickly. Okay, and you see this all the time in like countries in like Africa, Middle East, you know, when because they lack political stability, they just fall apart and the military takes over and so forth. All right, so of course Malaysia is trying to avoid that. They're trying to make sure they have a stable political system, but that's very much dependent on whether the economic system is working, whether you have development and you have enough economic activity, wealth to go around and so forth. Okay, so the first strategy here in the second Malaya Plan was, again, really emphasizing on building up the land development schemes. These were the major initiatives. And then, so by providing more land for the landless and creating job opportunities for the needy. Okay, so creating job opportunities, basic economics here. Just we want people to have jobs, economic stability. All right. Land for the landless. Land is not just about economics. Land is also about really having a sense of ownership, right? A sense of empowerment. You know, and then of course, once you have land, there's things you can do with it, right? So you can, of course, plant crops and so forth. So land for the landless was a very big policy. To improve human resource support and involvement, the government introduced a decentralized community development policy. Okay, so this is something interesting, and people probably don't realize it, but very early on, even in the 1960s, there was a policy to begin to decentralize, again, to strengthen communities and give them autonomy, right? So decentralizing. And so, of course, even within the land development schemes, the Feldas, the Felkras, giving the communities more empowerment. Okay, now we have the first Malaysia plan. Okay, so now we have 1965 has passed. So now we have Malaysia, moving on from Malaya. Now we have the newly formed Malaysia. Okay, and now we have the first Malaysian plan, or the first Malaysia plan from the 66 to 70 period. Okay, and again, still the emphasis is on infrastructure, economic growth, and eradication of poverty. All right. And so this is really a continuation, okay, because these things take time, you know, eradicating poverty and building up an infrastructure for the country and stuff. These things do take time. So in these early plans, you can see that the emphasis was very much on this economic stability and infrastructure development and addressing the needs of the rural and poor communities. Okay. You don't want to have big gaps between the urban and rural peoples, because this can create huge inequalities, right? And you don't you don't want that, of course. It's not healthy for a society. All right. So participation from community was still low at this time. Okay, still very much, everything was very much top down, as we talked about before. And poverty was still a very big problem in a lot of local communities. Okay, so that's why there's an emphasis on addressing poverty. People need to be educated to enable them to fully utilize the amenities and programs provided as sponsored and initiated by the state. Okay, so even for people to take advantage of the programs that the government is providing at this stage, you know, because of the lack of education among the people, they were not really able to take full advantage of it. Okay. So it's very interesting. And this is the period where the government was very aggressive in starting to send, like maybe some of your parents even went overseas to study, you know, on government scholarships and stuff like that. This is the period where they started to do that. They really started to send, you know, even some of my older colleagues who are now retired, professors and so forth, they were the ones that really benefited from these types of schemes, where they were sending people overseas to be educated in the UK, US, and Australia and stuff like that. So they're really trying to build up the human capital of the country as well. Okay, so that was a very important part of this period in Malaysia's history. So now I just want to take a detour here. I want to talk a little bit about poverty for a second, because it's important that we understand poverty in Malaysia, and especially how it's measured and how it's changed over time as well. Okay, so some of the important terms that we need to know, like for example, what is absolute poverty? And you can see there, this is from the NGO called Ideas, but here they have good definitions for us. Okay, so absolute poverty, a household is considered absolute poor if its total household income is below the PLI value. In 2019, the national mean PLI value was 2,208 per month. So this is a recently revised figure. Okay, I don't know if you guys were keeping up with the news at this time, but there was a lot of controversy over this because at that time, Malaysia's poverty rate was the PLI value, and I forget offhand what PLI stands for, but basically it's like the what they call the poverty line. Okay, poverty line. So if a household of 4 falls below 2,208 per month, the people in that household are considered poor in absolute terms. Okay, absolute poor. But there's also something called relative poverty. Okay, so that is poverty depending on where you live. Okay, based on the standard of living. Okay, so relative poverty comprises a comparing household incomes with a specific standard of living dictated by society. Relative poverty is seen as being below half the median income of all households in a year. So this one is going to be a little bit different depending on where you live. For example, 2,208 per month in KL is very different than in rural Sabah or rural Sarawak. Okay, so that's why they have something called relative poverty. And then the Gini coefficient is a method of measuring income inequality and distribution. So the smaller the coefficient, and so coefficient is usually between 0 and 1. Okay, that's the Gini coefficient. All right. And so if the smaller the value, the fairer the income distribution. So in other words, if in a society, if the Gini coefficient is closer to 0, that means that there's great equality. You don't have these huge gaps between the rich and poor people, right? But if you're closer to 1, if the society is closer to 1 in the Gini coefficient, that means there's a lot more inequality. So you have these great big differences between the rich and the poor. Okay, and that's very bad for society, because if there's great inequality in society, it's bad for many things, in many reasons, okay, in many ways. So it's an indicator to see how healthy the income distribution of a country is. All right. So we want to have a Gini coefficient that's closer to 0. This is what we want. Okay, so based on that, let's look at some statistics of Malaysia. Now, if you look at the incidence of rural, urban, and overall poverty in Malaysia from 1970 to 2012, okay, This is only to 2012, not to 2021, but you can see the huge decrease in poverty. Okay, starting in 1970, overall poverty was 49%. So half the country in 1970 was considered poor. Right? So that's a very high poverty rate, very high. So you can see now why those early development plans were focusing on poverty eradication, land ownership, right? Helping the rural communities. Because look in the rural communities, 58% poverty rate in the rural communities in 1970, right? And this is 1970, it's not even 1960, all right, or 55. So we assume it had gone down somewhat, but okay, 1970, right? Even urban poverty was 25%, quite high. But now you look at the progress that was made over that period of 42 years. This is 42 years. Look at the tremendous decrease down to 1.7% in 2012. That is incredible. That is incredible. Okay, so you guys as a country, Malaysia did a lot of really good things over this period to reduce poverty. Now, one of the controversial points about this is that this poverty rate, because as I said in the previous slide, the poverty line now is 2,200 something or other, 08, I think. Sorry for my writing so sloppy. Hard to write on this thing. But this 2000 is a new 2019 figure. Before that, it was only like, does anybody remember the previous poverty line number? It's very low. It's like 600 ringgit or something, right? So obviously, if the poverty line is like 600 ringgit, you're gonna have a lot less number of people considered poor, right? So once they raised the amount to 2,208, of course, the percentage of poverty went up again a little bit because it showed that there are actually more poor people than the poverty rate indicates. Okay, so that's why it was a little bit controversial. Now let's look at the disparity, income disparity in rural and urban areas. Okay, in terms of income. Okay, so this one is poverty rate here. You can see the poverty rate here, incidence, percentages. This one is in monthly income. Okay, look at the difference. Look at the increase. That is amazing. From 264 to 5,000. Okay, and this is based on 2012. That is a tremendous increase. Okay, so you can see that the country's made tremendous progress in terms of addressing poverty, right? Even though nowadays people look around and say, oh, there's so many poor people in Malaysia, right? And there still are. And in fact, when they increased the poverty line to this, as I said, the rate went up. So from like 4%, it went up to like 15%. So now we say there's about somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% of the country is considered poor now, and not as low as this 1.7 actually. All right. Does everybody understand? Can you all understand that? Can you see? Okay. Can I move on? All right. So here's another way of looking at the graph. Another graph. This is incidence of poverty by state. All right. And so here we have on the left, we have the key here. The green is absolute poverty. The pink is relative poverty. And the blue is the Gini coefficient. Right? So remember the Gini coefficient between 0 and 1. The better being closer to 0. So if it's close to 0 means it's more equal. There's less gap between rich and poor. If it's closer to 1, that means that there's more inequality. Okay, so we want it to be closer to 0. Okay, so you can see, let's start with our state, Selangor. Gini coefficient 0.39. Okay, so it's below 0.5, right? So not too bad. All right. there are some countries that are very close to 1, like India, for example. India has a very high Gini coefficient. You have extreme poverty and you have extreme wealth in India. And because you have these extremes, the Gini coefficient is very high. It's a lot of inequality, all right? Especially in less developed countries. You have Bangladesh and stuff. There are actually very wealthy people in those underdeveloped countries. But because most of the country is so poor, you know, they have these huge differences between rich and poor. So their Gini coefficients are very high, right? So it makes for a less healthy society, right? Because you don't have a middle class. There's very little middle class. We want a big middle class, right? Where everybody has enough, you know, everybody has enough, everybody is comfortable, right? That's really the goal. So that would be a very low Gini coefficient, close to 0. So Selangor has absolute poverty, very low, only 1.2%. Because you see here, this is the poverty line. Okay, so in Selangor, anybody that has any household income below 2022 is considered absolutely poor. So actually only 1.2% of people in Selangor are living below this 2022 per month. However, in relative poverty, because Selangor, this cost of living is higher, it's more expensive to live in Selangor, the relative poverty is higher. It's 15.3%. Okay, because 2022 in Selangor is not a lot. It's not a lot to live on, right? But that's considered poverty line, like the lowest level. So if you're below that, you're considered poor. Okay. So Selangor, because it's so expensive, 15.3%, the relative poverty is higher. Okay, now let's look at a state like Pahang. Pahang is very different, okay? Pahang, okay, so even though the mean income, the poverty line is higher than Selangor. So, but absolute poverty, there's more absolute poverty in Pahang, 4.3%. Okay, so there's a higher percentage of people living below this 2,270. But relative poverty is much lower than Selangor because it's less expensive, right? People don't have to pay as much for things there, generally speaking. Pahang is cheaper. It's a cheaper state to live in. So therefore, the relative poverty is lower. It's only 6%. Okay, and their Gini coefficient, you can see compared to Selangor, the Gini coefficient is lower too, 0.33 as opposed to 0.39, which means that it's a more equally distributed. The income is more equally distributed in Pahang than Selangor. Less extremes in terms of wealth. Okay. Now, I think the state with the highest poverty, relative poverty, is Malacca, actually. Ironically, I don't know why. 17% relative poverty in Malacca. The highest state for absolute poverty is Kelantan. See, 12.4%. So it means 12% of Kelantanese are living below 21.39 per month. All right. So Selangor is the lowest level of absolute poverty. Oh no, sorry. Putrajaya has. Sorry, no, KL has. KL has the lowest level of absolute poverty, but it has a high relative poverty rate because it's so expensive. Okay, so this gives us a much better understanding of poverty in Malaysia than just looking at that one figure, right? Poverty rate. This gives us it's a much more subtle way, captures more of the subtleties of each state, how expensive things are in each state, and so forth. Okay, so we can see based on this that poverty is distributed differently across the country. All right. And the last one I'm just going to show you about this poverty issue is the Gini coefficient. Now this is comparing 2016 and 2019, and in every, whether it's by urban or rural, okay, or it's by ethnic group. So you have Bumi and Malay here, Chinese, Indian, others. In all cases, the Gini coefficient is going up. Who can tell me what that means? Based on what we've just discussed, if you can capture that. What does that mean, that the Gini coefficient is going up? It means it's getting closer.
There are more inequality.
Exactly. Thank you, Nabila. It means it's getting closer to 1, which means there's more inequality. So we know for a fact, statistically, that inequality is growing in Malaysia. And this is why the government is so concerned. That's why in 2019, they launched the what is it called now? The policy, the new policy. I can't think of the name of it. Shared, what was it? I was just looking at it early before class and I can't remember now. But the policy is directed at, geared at addressing this issue of inequality. Okay, because everyone's aware of the fact that there's growing inequality in the country. And this is very bad. This is not a healthy trend. We want to stop this trend. Okay, so we have to do something about this. And you can see the differences in the ethnic groups. So even though there's 2016, it's only 3 years. So things don't change all that much usually in 3 years, unless you have like COVID-19. If we looked at the data now from 2018 to 2021, we would see a totally different graph here because of COVID-19, right? And so we don't even know yet. We don't have data yet to know for sure how this has changed because of COVID-19. But I'm sure once we see the data, it's going to be very shocking, actually. Because actually during COVID-19, like in 2020, in fact, globally, throughout the world, the very rich people got extremely rich. In fact, in 2020, there were 200 new billionaires in China. 200 people became billionaires in China during COVID-19 in 2020. In fact, so they got extremely more wealthy. Those very few people got very wealthy. Whereas, of course, the masses, pretty much everybody else got poorer because of COVID-19. All right, so COVID-19 has been very bad for inequality throughout the world, not just here, or not just in any particular country, but everywhere. So as you can see, ethnic group wise, for whatever reason, the Indian population suffered the worst in this 2016 to 2019 period in terms of inequality. Not sure why, we don't really know, but that seems to be what the data is showing us here. Okay. Everything else is pretty, it's not huge increases, but it's increasing. So that is something of concern. Okay. So these are important things. These are the things that dictate developmental policies. Okay, that's why I'm showing you this. We have to know these trends because this is why the government is, for example, why they are so concerned about inequality, and why, the 12th Malaysia Plan, I'm sure, is going to have a lot of initiatives and programs to address this problem of inequality. Okay, so that's why it's important to know this stuff. Okay, so back to our, sorry, any questions about that? Any questions at all about the poverty figures just now? No? Okay. All right. So let's get back to our Malaysia plan. So now we're on to the second Malaysian plan. And this is where the new economic plan begins. As we know, we had Malaysia suffered the race riots in 1969. And in response to the race riots, the racial riots, the government launched the NEP. Okay, so so here we have the second, third, and the fourth Malaysian plans kind of lumped together because they are all aimed at implementing the NEP goals, the new economic policy goals, which, as we know, had a lot of affirmative action policies for Malays and Bumiputras. Okay, that was one of the thrusts of the development policy. And again, it was the government sort of realizing that there was we had these, again, inequalities. And so inequalities were really threatening the social fabric of the country. Okay, so race riots because of inequality. So this is the concern. So the government felt they need to do something to address these issues of inequality. And so these three Malaysian plans are really designed to really address these issues of inequality. Okay, so just a rundown on some of the policies. So intensification of rural development. So really trying to address rural development. Okay, again, the vast majority of the rural people are Malays. And so this was really addressed at trying to develop the Malay rural areas. Okay, increase the participation of people in planning, implementation, and gaining benefits of development. So beginning to take more of a participatory approach at this time. All right, so this is the first time we see this really in the Malaysia plan, is the idea of really increasing participatory approaches rather than top down. Okay, so before this, Malaysia plans were very much top down, give, land development, Felda, Felcro, all these very big government policies, but not very participatory, very much top down. Okay, so at this time now we begin to see the inclusion of participatory approaches. Equal opportunities for provisions such as education, health, and housing. All right. So at this time now we start to really see again, addressing the issue of equality. All right. So making sure that everybody is getting enough opportunity for education, health, and housing, okay, and the basic needs, right? These are the basic needs that people need to survive, right? So to make sure that everybody has those. Right? Because again, it was this concern that the country was going to dissolve. It was going to, these tensions between the different groups in the country because of inequality, and it was going to really tear the country apart. And that's the worst thing that a government can have happen. So they really emphasized on addressing these inequalities. Increasing job opportunities in both the public and private sectors. Okay, so now we really see a thrust towards economics and increasing economic activity, job opportunities. Creation of agencies based on commodities, target groups, and regions. Okay, so more agencies related to commodity development. And then economic growth through manufacturing and industry. Okay, so this is where we begin to see an emphasis on manufacturing industry. Before this, it was on what? Okay, so who can tell me before this? Before the emphasis switched to manufacturing and industry, the focus was on what? See how well you've been paying attention. Before this, the emphasis was on developing what?
Is it the primary commodities?
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Nabila. So it was on developing those primary commodities, right? Those big raw material resources, right? And that was really a continuation of the British policies, because that's what the British were interested in. They were developing the commodity sectors so that they could reap the benefits of them. Okay, so the new government, when the Malaysian government took over, the local government took over, they sort of continued those development policies focusing on commodities. All right. Now we begin to see, and this especially like in the late 1970s, 1980s, especially once Tun Mahathir took over the first time he was prime minister, he really started to push for the development of manufacturing and industry. All right, and in fact, this is the time when it was a little bit later. I think it was the late 80s, or was it early 90s? I don't remember, but this is the time when UPM, okay, we are University Putra, but before that we were what? What was our name before?
Pertanian.
Yes, we were University Pertanian. Right, and so the whole switch to University Putra was actually in response to this. And in fact, it was Tun Mahathir himself who wanted us to switch our name, because at that time, Pertanian was seen as it was actually labeled by the prime minister as a sunset industry. It's not that important anymore. We need to focus on manufacturing, industry, technology, and so forth. Okay, so there's this real big shift now towards manufacturing for economic development. Okay, so we see that in these later Malaysian plans. Okay, so the 1986 to 95 period, the 5th and 6th Malaysian plans, okay, towards achieving the National Development Plan. Okay, Vision 2020. This is where Vision 2020 began, right, as a national development plan aimed at becoming a fully developed nation by 2020. Okay, and there was something called the Village Revolution that was announced, aimed to improve standards of living and increase levels of productivity. And this is the first time we start to see things about like increasing productivity, because this is another economic term that's very much tied in with manufacturing. All right, so increasing levels of productivity, increasing output, and increasing wealth and development for the country. Okay, so this is the shift towards the more of the thrust towards manufacturing. Okay, so here during this period, we see economic growth through industrialization. Okay, factories, right? Big factories, plants, and so forth. And this is where the push for a lot of we talked about last week, direct foreign investment, remember? Or foreign direct investment, FDI. Okay, so we start to see more foreign companies coming in, setting up factories, right? And this is when, it was this period where Malaysia was referred to as the tiger economy. This is of course before your time, but what does that mean? Do you have any idea what that might mean? Malaysia, not just Malaysia, but several of the Southeast Asian countries at this time were referred to as the tiger economies, right? Now, it's not only because you're in Southeast Asia and it's affiliated with tigers, but but there's also another name related to that. So the tiger economy, because the Malaysian economy was growing so much. At one point, the Malaysian economy was growing over 10% a year, which is a tremendous amount of economic growth. And it was during this industrialization manufacturing period, right? And that's when Malaysia was referred to or was known as a tiger economy because it was growing so much and so fast. And so we had all these foreign companies were setting up factories and plants and so forth. So we had all this industrialization. And so this was really the engine of growth. And this is when the Twin Towers were built and the infrastructure in Malaysia was modernizing. KLIA was built, okay? So we had these major infrastructure projects that were going on as a result of all this economic activity, all right? So technology started to get really put to use in all sectors of development, okay? We had a lot of human resource development. So there's, because to do all these other things, industrialization, increase in technology, of course you need HRD, right? People have to get training. They have to have the skills to do all these things, right? And so we have a push, real big push for HRD here. And so this is when HRD in Malaysia really started to become a major field of importance, right? With all this economic development. Of course, sustainable development was not a priority at that point. We didn't hear much about it, but it was beginning, people were beginning to talk about it, right? Because anytime you have a lot of economic activity, there's going to be what? A lot of factories bring a lot of what? Related to the environment. What happens to the environment when you have a lot of factories and a lot of economic? Yeah, pollution. You have a lot of pollution and you have, you know, all these different threats to the environment, right? You have to build more plants, which means clearing away more natural land, habitats, rainforests, hutan, whatever. So a lot of environmental issues began to crop up at this time. Okay, so it sort of began to get onto people's radars, even though there wasn't the kind of push that we see today, of course. Okay, inculcation of positive values. This is the first time really that the development plan, the national development plan, had any sort of mention about social values. Okay, inculcation of positive values. Why do you think this might be? Why suddenly now at this period during industrialization, great economic growth, factories, all these things, why suddenly would there be a need for pushing the inculcation of positive values in society? Anybody have any idea? Who can guess? As the country is developing, it's becoming wealthier, there's more economic activity. What tends to happen to social values if they don't pay attention to them? Kali tak jaga, what happens? Well, there is a fear that economic development, these types of positive values begin to take a back seat. So people pay less attention to them because people spend more time worrying about materialistic concerns, right? So everyone starts to chase wealth and they forget about the need for positive values. Okay, so things like crime, social ills among young people, right? These things start to increase. So the government has to actually put that in the development plan. So we see that in the development plan. All right, and then you have these imbalances between sectors and regions, which of course is going to happen when you have, for example, if all the economic activity is based in KL, right, then KL becomes extremely developed and wealthy, and then other sectors and regions of the country don't. So it creates even greater imbalances. So this is the problem. And then of course, interethnic unity. This is related to the values as well. This is still a concern at this time. Interethnic unity. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here. Actually, we'll stop here. Yeah, 17. That's where I want to stop. Okay, I'm going to stop here. The second half of this we'll do next week, inshallah. And so, are any questions about that so far? We can see how your country of Malaysia has evolved in terms of its development goals and progress. No questions? All right, if not, I want to go back to put your blast. Good job. All right, so now what I'm going to have you do is, like last week, I'm going to give you the rest of the class time. You can either begin to work on this with your partners and group members, or you can do it during the week sometime. It's up to you. But I'm going to give you the rest of the class time to work on it. Okay, so in the folder down here, I have included a handout. It's called the Executive Summary Midterm Review of the 11th Malaysia Plan. Okay, so it is exactly what it says it is. It's a policy paper that looks at the 11th Malaysia Plan. Okay, now we haven't talked about that yet, so I understand that. We're going to do that next week. But to get you started, I want you to work on this first. All right. And there's 4 questions here that I'm going to have you guys address. Okay. So from the policy paper, executive summary, I want you to answer these 4 questions. All right. And then just like last week, I'll make a folder for you to submit it. And it should not be long, just a couple pages at most. All right. And you can break up these questions between your members. Okay. So let me just read the questions and make sure that you understand them clearly. So starting on page 18 of the document, in terms of the policies and strategies discussed in the plan, what are the different ways that communities are conceptualized? In other words, what communities in the plan are targeted, right? So the plan is focusing on what communities, okay? And then how is it referring to communities? For example, is it talking about the Bumi Putra community, which is an ethnic community, the B40 community, which is a social demographic community? Okay, so how is the plan itself looking at the word community? And how is it developing policies for different communities? All right, so try to identify as many communities as you can and what type of communities they represent from that policy, okay? So starting on page 18. Okay, and then on page 25 of the plan, of the review, sorry, the targets mentioned reflect an emphasis on which communities within Malaysia. Why does the plan emphasize those communities? All right. Starting on page 31, what is the plan's thrust regarding empowering human capital? What are the core strategies to empower human capital and which groups are prioritized? And then in your opinion, list the different ways that the plan's strategies for strengthening economic growth can improve the well-being for B40 Malaysians. So in the 11th Malaysian plan, the current one, there is a big emphasis on addressing the needs of the B40, okay? Who can tell me what the B40 is? B40 Malaysians refers to what? Who are the B40? Are they the name of a group? What kind of group are they? They refer to what?
I think for the B40, Prof, I think B40 is considered to those who have what I call it, income, I think below 2,000, I think. I forgot lah the
Yeah.
amount of how much. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Hadi. What does B40 itself mean? What referred to though? Do you know? B40.
Bottom 40%.
Yes, bottom 40% of what?
Malaysian people.
But how do they, what's the 40% of what? 40% of what? Yes, of Malaysian people, but the 40% refers to what? 40% in terms of?
Household income.
Income, thank you. Yeah, household income. So it's the poorest 40% of the population. Okay, so if you take all Malaysians and put them on a list, according to their income, so the richest people at the top, the poorest at the bottom, it's that bottom 40%, the poorest 40% of Malaysians. Okay, that's the B40, what, below 40. Okay, that's why it says B40. Okay, so it says here, in your opinion, list the different ways that the plan's strategies for strengthening economic growth can improve the well-being for the B40 Malaysians. Okay, so 11th Malaysian Plan has a lot of focus on the B40 group. Again, because they're trying to address this issue of inequality. Okay, inequality is the big concern. So they're focusing a lot on the B40 group. Okay, so I'm going to let you go. Are there any questions about this assignment? Homework? I don't like to call it assignment. It's more just homework.
Prof, I have one question regarding to maybe nowadays. Actually, as what I heard before this, I think the B40 term has been changed, right, into B50. I think so lah. But
okay,
I didn't remember where I heard about that terms.
Yeah, yeah, these things are always changing. In the policy itself, they refer to B40, but that might be changing to B50. So they focus on the lower half, basically the lower half of the country now. And again, it's just it's out of concern of and this may be because of COVID-19, you know, because COVID-19 has made that Gini coefficient bigger and has made inequality worse. So now they're focusing on the lower half of Malaysians. And that could be the reason. Yeah, so that's a good observation. Thanks, Hadi, for that. Any other questions? If not, then we can say adios. Assalamualaikum. See you all next week. You have 45 minutes. You can work now or you can do it on your own time. Up to you guys. All right. If you have any questions during the week, you can always WhatsApp me. All right. Take care.
Thank you, Prof.
Right, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Assalamualaikum. Before Ramadan starts. Okay. Assalamualaikum.